Part 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between a woman who is moving to London and an employee of a relocation service.
London Relocation Services, Daniel speaking. How may I help you?
Good morning. My family and I are moving to London later this year, and I wonder if you can help.
Sure. First of all, I'll need to get some personal details. May I take your full name, please?
It's Anna Woods.
Thanks. Where are you moving from?
Northern Ireland, just outside Belfast, actually.
Right. And what's your current address?
It's 118 Fordyce Park. I'll spell that for you. It's Fordyce. And that's in Ballysillan.
And what's the postcode?
It's BT14 9BJ.
All right. And could I take a contact phone number?
I'll give you my mobile number, as you can get me on that anytime. It's 07840 51963.
Great. Got that. Now, we always like to get a bit more information about the families that we're moving. It helps with the search. Are you moving for work?
Yes, my husband's just got a new job in London.
And what about you? Do you work?
Well, I've been working as a teaching assistant recently, but I'm actually a qualified nurse and I'd like to get back into that if possible.
Right. And do you have any children?
Yes, a son. So we need to find a school for him.
Is it a secondary school you'll be looking for?
No, he's still in primary school. He's not quite at the secondary level yet.
Fine. So, let's go on to talk about your requirements for the property. Do you have a preferred location? Is your husband's job in the centre?
No, it's in East London, but we'd rather live somewhere quieter.
Sure. There are some lovely areas in the south.
OK, that sounds great. Now, my husband doesn't want to spend too long commuting to work every day.
So I imagine that ideally he'd like to be not too far from a station then.
Yes, he drives now, but I guess that's not going to be possible, and he's not keen on buses.
What about you or your son? Do you have any preferences? Does your son do any sport, for example?
He's quite active, so I'm sure he'd love a park nearby to run around in. He doesn't do swimming or anything like that.
Great. So what sort of property do you have in mind?
We have friends who live in an amazing flat over there, but as we've always lived in a house, I think we'll stick with that. We'd find it hard to adapt to a flat.
OK. And size-wise, how many bedrooms would you like?
Well, there's just myself, my husband and our son.
So you definitely need a 2-bedroom property. But how about having a guest room? I might be able to find a 3-bedroom property for you.
Yes, that would be ideal. We're sure to have family visiting often.
All right, I've made a note of that. Now, are there any other requirements for your new property?
Well, it's not essential, but it'd be handy to have an office for when my husband works from home. It doesn't need to be a big one. I guess it all comes down to budget.
Yes. OK, Anna. Well, I've certainly got enough to be getting on with, and I will...
Section 2. You will hear the director of a club giving a talk about an ancient game played on ice called curling.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Montreal Curling Club. I hope you'll enjoy the introductory program we've prepared for you. I'll start with a brief introduction to the game itself and the equipment, so that you'll be able to enjoy it when you watch it later on. I'll then go on to say a little about the history of the sport and the club. So, first, let's take a look at the game of curling and the implements it uses. It's played on ice, and the object of the game is for two teams to push heavy stones across the ice towards a target. Now, there are 4 people in each of the 2 teams. The first is called the lead. The next is called the second. The next, surprise, surprise, is called the third. And the final player, who is absolutely key, functions as the captain, but is always called the skip. That's S-K-I-P. The area of play on the ice, whether it be on a rink or on a frozen lake or stream, is called the sheet. This long, thin area is 42.15 meters by only 4.25 meters. And unlike ice hockey ice, for example, it is constantly groomed by frequent shaving to keep it perfectly level. At either end of this are the 2 zones for the targets. Each one is known as a house. A little bit about the equipment we need. The stones are made from granite. Originally, these were held by your fingers in holes specially carved out in the top. But then it was decided to add a handle to get a better grip. The other distinctive implement is the brush, or broom. This is used for 2 purposes. To clean the ice, of course, but more crucially, to warm it. This melts the ice slightly and lessens the friction, so you get a smoother slide. Curling is not an expensive sport. You don't buy your own stones. In fact, it is illegal to play in a match with your own stones, but you can use your own brush. There are 2 main types, Scottish and Canadian. The former are normally made out of horsehair, and the latter, which are now more frequently used, are made of synthetic materials, and they don't leave as many threads on the ice. Now, apart from stones and brushes, the only other piece of equipment you would need as a beginner is a rubber sole on one of your shoes, depending on which shoe you lead from. The captain will often carry a stopwatch to gauge when the ice needs to be changed. All equipment and clothing can be bought in the club shop. A quick word about Montreal Curling Club. It's renowned, not only because it often wins championships, but because it was the first club for any sport in the whole of the North American continent. And although curling is not as well known as many other winter sports, we still boast a certain amount of influence in the National Sports Council. And what are the origins of the game? It's now well established that it started in Scotland in at least as early as the 16th century. Queen Victoria, on her frequent trips to Scotland, often played it, but wrote in her diary that it required exceptional strength to throw the stones. Her patronage attracted a great deal of interest in the game, especially amongst younger players, and this was enhanced further when she granted a royal title to the Caledonian Curling Club, which had been set up in the early 19th century to create standard rules for the game. Curling has always had support in high places. In the 16th century, the Scottish Parliament actually banned golf and football as violent and unprofitable sports. They felt that local men should spend any free time practicing archery for self-defense against their enemies. But the less popular game of curling wasn't included in the ban. The art of throwing stones was thought to be just as useful as shooting arrows. But back to Canada. Here the game has flourished since the beginning of the 19th century, when Scottish soldiers posted there enjoyed playing it on the frozen lakes and rivers. Because of the difficulty in importing granite stones from Scotland, cast iron was used instead, obtained from melted down cannonballs, which had originally been brought over from Europe. Now Canada is regarded as the most successful curling nation in the world. Now, the game you're going to see.
Section 3. You will hear two students called Eva and Mike discussing their research project on tourism.
Hi, Eva. Is this a good time for us to look at our research project? Our tutor told us to keep the focus narrow. So what about we go for why people choose to go to certain places and attractions and leave the rest out?
You're right. Otherwise, we'll have far too much information to cope with. Okay, so what about the survey?
Well, I've looked through the ideas we had for questions for it, and I think it's not clear how we use the word area. Sometimes it seems to mean a place, other times the field of our research, and even tourist attraction in some cases.
Oh, I think that's my fault. I typed out our notes.
Oh, it's probably best to use it for place in the sense of province or whatever.
Yes, I think so. You know, we decided to concentrate on culture and tourism. I wonder if we're really saying culture in the same way as most people do, because on our list of places to carry out our surveys, I see you've put the Round Music Festival, which is contemporary music. I thought we were going to be looking at more traditional forms of culture.
That would be confirming these old-fashioned ideas that culture has to be something that's at least 100 years old.
But that is what most people think.
Well, let's not get into an argument about that right now. Let's think about the number of completed questionnaires we need. In total, how many questionnaires do you think we have to get? 100? 200? And over how many different events?
Our tutor said we should have at least 200. Otherwise, the information won't actually mean that much. And I think it's not practical to try to go to more than about 5 events. We've got to get the first draft in by the end of February.
And you think we should interview everybody or just tourists?
Because presumably there'd be local people, domestic tourists, and international tourists at some events.
In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think we should just go for the tourists, but from overseas as well as national. I'm sure we'd be able to provide more interesting results if we did that.
Right.
There's one thing that worries me, though.
What's that?
We said it's important to get some background on the people who answer our questions, like what's their job, what they thought about the event. But the idea of asking people how old they are...
We can just ask them to tick a box with an age in it and tell them they don't have to do it if they don't want to. We could write in our own estimate when we've finished.
Are you sure that would be okay?
Yes, it's not the most crucial piece of information they're giving. We're going to have a lot of facts and figures to present. Have you any preference for putting them into a pie chart, a table, or a graph?
Tables are easy to do, but I read that most people find pie charts visually stimulating. I hate reading graphs because, unless they're quite big, you don't get exact figures.
Pie chart sounds good. How are we going to divide up the work?
If it's okay with you, I'd like us to meet as often as possible to look at what we've each written up. But we should do the actual writing on our own. Okay, would this be a good time to discuss our introduction? An overview of tourism around the world, looking at different tourist attractions in different countries. But there are so many to choose from, though, so let's narrow it down.
Absolutely.
I found out that Mexico celebrates the fact that it produces a huge number of varieties of chilies, and people flock to this special event to taste dishes using them. A lot of people think of Mexico as being the best place to see fantastic museums. That's true, but let's take a different tact. What about Greece, one of the world's most famous countries for tourists?
Yes, and I think we should go for the ruins in this case. The temples and theaters and so on, rather than the food.
And for Britain, instead of focusing on the countryside and parks, I'd like to find out more about why people go to see plays and musicals. Is it because there's such a good choice?
Interesting point. And for India, instead of concentrating on the temples or the game parks, we could mention all the different folk dances. Every region has its own, and they don't just perform them at festivals. They're part of everyday life.
Okay, we've got more than enough. Let's draft the introduction.
Section 4. You will hear a university professor giving a lecture on the influence of children on the adult diet.
Today we continue with our series of lectures on diet and society in the 21st century. We are all aware of the obesity epidemic facing our society. The reasons for this are well documented and are mainly due to poor eating habits coupled with too little exercise. In fact, a National Health and Nutrition Survey here in the U.S. concluded that the average total food intake increased considerably between the years 1971 and 2000. This appears to be a general trend across most age groups. In fact, apart from the over 60s, all areas of American society are consistently above the dietary guidelines for caloric intake and saturated fat. However, total fat consumption is highest for teenagers, and there is a clear correlation with fast food consumption. Among the wide range of factors influencing an individual's dietary choices, one of the strongest influences is the home. It will come as no surprise that within a family the fat intakes of husbands and wives and parents and children who cohabit are remarkably similar. Many people assume that this relationship indicates the influence of parents on their children, but we wanted to ask if children influence poor diets in adults. This hypothesis had not been tested in a national sample until now. In our study, we focused only on adults, and we set our lower age limit at 17 and the upper one at 65. The key variable was the presence or absence of children, so we identified only those adults whose children were under 17. Other variables included the age of the adult, level of education they had reached, their ethnic background, their income, and foreign-born status. To obtain our data, first we conducted interviews in the respondents' own homes, and all in all we interviewed 6,600 adults aged over 17. Then we invited them to mobile examination centers where surveys were conducted. From this information, we were able to focus not only on the total fat intake, but also on the person's total caloric consumption. Our results show that the presence of children led to significantly higher levels of both fat consumption and saturated fat in adults. We found on average that adults with children in the home ate 4.9 grams per day of fat more than adults without children. This result is consistent irrespective of race, gender, or age. The foods more commonly were convenience items high in fat or sugar, including pizza, salty snacks, and ice cream. Interestingly, there is a significantly higher percentage of adults in this group who drink milk. There are many explanations for this increased fat intake. Hectic schedules where parents try to balance work, family, and leisure put time at a premium. Another issue is children's preference for fatty foods or foods with a high sugar content. Fast foods and ready-to-eat foods are convenient choices. It is inconvenient to prepare different meals for both the children and the parents, so it is likely that adults consume the same as their children. Of course, there were limitations to our study. One of these is that we did not take into account the number of minors in each household, which could have an effect on the adult who feeds the children. In addition, this study does not take into account the relationship of the adult to the minor. We could also postulate that the older a child gets, the more independent he or she becomes, and so the influence a child has on an adult may lessen depending on the age of the child. In terms of recommendations as a result of this study, we would like to see more research conducted to overcome the limitations outlined earlier. We also feel there is a need for even further research into the influence that friends can have on our fat intake, given the clear link we've established between family members.